Ioannis, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yes, thank you, Tom, for your invitation. I'm looking forward to our discussion. About me, I was born and raised in Sweden. I moved to Greece for a couple of years to study theology, and now I've moved back to Sweden and are studying biblical studies. So as you will hear, my English is not my first language. I hope you and your audience will have patience with me. I'm an Orthodox Christian, and yeah.
Cool. So tell me more about your position on atheism and theism. I'm an atheist, which I believe that everything is best explained by naturalism. And the debate topic today is, can atheism be justified? I, of course, think it can. So go ahead and tell me your position.
Yes, thank you. So you used the word naturalism, and I think a misunderstanding sometimes is that we Christians are, or let me say it like this: a big part of the Christian faith is naturalism, and this will be provocative for some. But what I mean by that is that even the soul is, in a sense, matter. Christians say it's immaterial, but this is only in relation to, let's say, from a human perspective. But from God's perspective, only God is truly immaterial. So that I want to clarify that, because Orthodox theology speaks more of the distinction between created and uncreated. And in the sphere of created, the soul of humans, the earth, the sun, the cosmos, the universe is fitting in that category. But you asked me what I think of atheism. I mean, I don't think anything particular. I am not an atheist myself, so obviously I don't agree with its tenets. I think that to a large part, atheism in West, at least, is basically a product or a continuation of the Reformation in some sense. And you can even take that back to the Bible. I mean, you can read passages where some prophet is making fun of, the other gods, that, they are not real or something like that. They, you paint a face, but it can't hear anything, it can't speak anything. So I think people like Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man, the historian Tom Holland, will say something like atheism perhaps, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but perhaps is in many ways a Christian atheism. It's reacting against Christianity in particular. And yeah, I don't know if you want me to say anything else about that, but we can do that later in discussion. Yeah.
Sure. So can atheism be justified? What's your position on that specifically?
I mean, I don't feel it's my burden to try to justify atheism, so I would say no. But I think it's another thing it's important for people to understand is that Christians think differently about these things. So, I mean, some Protestants or Catholics may be more intellectually inclined and speak about God as an hypothesis or something like that. But so can atheism be justified? I don't think it's only an intellectual question. But I don't know. Do you think it can? And what are your reasons, let's say, for it?
Yes. I think atheism can be justified. I think it's rational to conclude there is no God, because any kind of God concept that's been presented is most likely imaginary and not a thing that corresponds to reality. Until there's some evidence that shows that it's existent outside of just people's imagination, it's rational to conclude that any God concept is exactly the same as a leprechaun or a fairy or a Santa Claus, something humans have made up. And since we have abundant evidence that humans make stuff up, it's more plausible that any such claim is a figment of human imagination and therefore does not exist.
Okay. So let me ask you a question before we move on. I have also a YouTube channel. You have a YouTube channel. What are your aims with it? Do you
Money.
want to hear money? Right. But you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. I mean, you are in particular discussing religious topics. So is that how did you start? Have you always been an atheist, for example?
No, I was a Christian, was brought up in a Christian household, Catholic, grade school, Catholic, high school. Lost my faith late high school. Started my YouTube channel as a result of me asking professors to go to coffee and talk about philosophy. I specifically focus on religion because it's a good way to contrast my epistemology and morality. I wrote an epistemology and morality, and it's easier to talk about those topics when contrasting them with a different ideology to show that they're better than that other ideology. And Christianity or religion is the topic I usually go with because it provides something to compare with on all the same scopes that my model is based on.
Okay, so do you think, what are like the best arguments you have heard and the worst arguments of say Christians?
Worst arguments would be like, well, there's different classes of worst arguments. There's some that are just so incoherent gibberish that it's just nonsense, like lights and colors prove God. That's a pretty dumb one. I think the worst academic argument I've heard is the ontological argument. That one's pretty bad. I don't know if there's a best one. They're all pretty bad from my perspective. I mean, the best argument for God I've heard would be from Hinduism. That's the Vedas predicts the age of the earth is 4.3 billion years old, and that's pretty close, like 95% accuracy. That would be the best argument I've heard for God.
Okay, so so you're not. What would then convince you? Say, do you have anything that would change your mind?
Novel testable predictions.
Like, can you give an example?
Well, anything that you can predict about the future based on your hypothesis that'll regularly get it right. I pray to God for a gold brick. A gold brick appears in front of me every time. That would be a novel testable prediction. Jesus comes back, or everyone, like all the Christians, get raptured and disappear at some point. That's a testable prediction. We see God after we die. That's a testable prediction. Jesus comes back. That's a testable prediction. Just novel testable predictions. Same with science.
So, okay, that's interesting because in Orthodox Christianity, an emphasis is laid on experience, and I don't mean experience like feelings. I mean, let's say experience in things you have seen or heard. The gospel speaks about, the person we have seen, heard, touched. This is the person we proclaim. So even if you, let's say, you have not had that kind of experiences, do you think like every experience that people have had in the history of humankind is just false, or
of
the divine?
I would say that every experience that we have is better explained by things that we already know about. So like delusion, misconception, fallacies, biases. There are tens of thousands of examples of those that we all have incredibly strong empirical evidence that they exist in all human brains. And so if it is in a category of things that fits within those lists of fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions, misconceptions, etc., then they're not rational to believe correspond to reality, and they pretty much all do. They literally all do. And so you need some way to go beyond personal experience and show that it's true, independent of just your subjective experience, for it to be evidence.
Okay. So, right. I think that for many religious people, or I can speak for myself, I think some of the experience that we have had is so profound that it becomes almost like you're trying to deny the facts instead of just letting them show you, let's say, the truth. But so let me give you an example so you know what I'm talking about. There is in Greece a famous priest, a theologian. It's called Ludovicus, and but he was an atheist and he was studying psychoanalysis and stuff. And in the Orthodox world in Greece, there were 2-3 persons, Saint Porphyrius and now Saint Porphyrius, some more, that had the fame of, being like prophets. And I don't mean that in a Protestant, like, crazy way, with crazy eyes and stuff like that. I mean, in a genuine way. And so he, like many others, went, to see, just of interest, what could this person be? And so he went. He has told me this personally, and he has also spoken about this in different situations on the internet. So he went there with a group of other people, skeptic, doesn't believe in God, he thinks it's fairy tales. And I think it was Saint Porphyrius was outside sitting, and he said, I will go. He was talking with different people, and I said, I will go in now. And Ludovicus said, was disappointed. Then he turned to him and said, are you looking for evidence for God? He said, that would be nice, something like that. So he said, come back here tomorrow, next day, and we can talk. Okay, so that happened. He came back next day, and he said, let's go take a walk to the woods. So they went to the woods, and he started. This is his personal testimony. So he started to tell him about things about when he was born that had happened, and so. But then that was the first step for him to stop and think. But maybe this is. He said, "How do you know this? And nobody knows this." So later he asked his mother and said, "Who told you about these things?" That only his mother and presumably the doctor would know about. But then Porphyrius said to him, I'm reading poetry, and maybe you can help me interpret the poetry. So he started to tell him a piece of poetry, and it was something that Ludovicus had written in his bedroom, personally, and never published anything like that. So at that point, he felt, let's say, the presence of God, and understood that this was something else. This was not fairy tales. So, I mean, that is just one experience, and there is no logical, I think, explanation for how he could know what he's personally writing on paper in his room, a big piece of poetry. So, yeah. Maybe you can comment on that, what your initial thoughts are.
Didn't happen. It was made up. The whole story was made up. That would be one option. But I mean, there's lots of other options. But if you wanted to say that this happened, you'd have to actually do it publicly, not in a forest. You'd have to like do it in a scientific journal, do it in a double-blind controlled study to actually show this happens. And if the guy can do it, then he should be able to do it multiple times for multiple people, and not just for example, if he actually studied the information beforehand or looked through the guy's house beforehand, or was told by his family or friends or something. Like there's lots of possibilities there. In order to show that this wasn't just a fabrication, you would have to like do a James Randi kind of experiment where here's a random person, do it for them, go and record it live so people can watch and verify and then repeat it with more people. And that just hasn't happened. It never happens because every time we test it, it didn't end up being fake because these kinds of stories are a dime a dozen. There's lots of them, but whenever they get tested, they're all proven false with 100% accuracy, always false.
Okay, but I think the unconvincing, let's say for me, is, and I don't want to go into a debate, but it's nice to discuss about these things. What I'm not convinced of, let's say in your response, is that I know this person. I know like 10, 15 people that have said exactly the same kind of things to me. And I myself have had similar situations. So maybe I think we need to make a distinction between what we are publicly proving and something which is true. There are many things that are true that can't be or aren't, let's say, proven in a scientific setting. So are you like scientistic? Is that a word? It's scientism where the only true things are which can be reached by, let's say, physics and biology, chemistry.
Well, no, but that's irrelevant here because the point here is that personal testimony, what people say, is the least trustworthy thing in the world. It doesn't work ever, never, ever. So especially if it's people you know, trusting people you know is the worst thing to do because you're a bias. You care about them, and so you want to believe them. That's why science has adopted this principle of you're not allowed to believe the people that you know. You have to test what they say independent of your own personal subjective beliefs. And what you're saying is very, very easy to test. They're saying if you can do psychic mind readings or something, okay, let's do a double-blind controlled study where you can do a psychic mind reading of people. We'll record it, we'll test it, and if you get it right, that's great evidence. And so it's perfectly fine to use your personal experiences as a way to build a hypothesis. It's never justified to believe that hypothesis until you've confirmed it independently of your subjective biases. And we have a subjective bias to trust friends and family. And so the fact that you've heard it from friends and family and your own personal experience is not ever justified in believing that. We know it's not because we know that those fallacies and biases in our minds tend to make us believe things that are just objectively false the vast majority of the time. And so we need to filter those out in order to find out, is this really true? And so science in this context is required because we know that the things that you're putting trust in right now are unreliable. They do not work. They fail. They get things wrong so often that science has said that no, you can't trust these things. We've tested these things, they don't work, they fail. So these are not trustworthy sources. Use a different source, double-blind peer-reviewed study. And so this isn't about scientism. This is about science has proved that those methods are bad methods, so you can't use those.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with parts of what you're saying. I don't think either that you can, but it's a successful strategy to use, let's say, science in strict natural scientific methods, because it's not meant to be like that. I mean, and it feels like a bit of a. I have two like questions. The one is you said quite strongly this never can happen. So I mean, then the question is, how do you know that, and how has science shown that this can't happen? This can't be true.
So how do I know what? Whether or not it can happen? The second question is easy. Like it doesn't matter if it can happen. The question is there reason to believe it did, or is there reason to believe it's imaginary and it didn't? What was the first one? Like, how do I know what?
Yeah, I mean, so I told you this personal story, And you said things like this can't be true because most of the times it's not true, and it's a factual claim. And I was wondering, how do you know that that's the case?
Oh, abundance of empirical data. So, like if someone says, I saw a unicorn, I can say you had a delusion, and
Mhm.
that's what the evidence indicates. So if the options are they literally saw an actually existing unicorn, is it possible? Sure, it's possible. But there's zero evidence to conclude that, where there's tens of thousands of pieces of empirical evidence to show that they probably had a delusion, a hallucination, a false memory. And so all of those things are rational to conclude. It is completely irrational to ever conclude they actually saw a unicorn. There's no context in which it's rational to justify they actually saw a unicorn. But it's always rational to say that they had an illusion, delusion, misconception. Maybe they saw it on a TV. There's no context where it was an actual real existing unicorn. Same thing applies to anything that lacks an empirical basis. Miracles, magic, mythical creatures, paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, all of those are the exact same. It will always be rational to say that's a delusion. It will never be rational to say that is believable. In order to make it believable, you'd have to go beyond the personal experience and say, here is some double-blind, peer-reviewed, testable, repeatable, novel prediction that we can demonstrate. And you demonstrate it in that context scientifically, and then you're like, okay, now it's believable. Now it's something that we can justifiably say, yeah, okay, you discovered something. That's awesome. But until you do that, the personal experience counts for nothing. And this is the same standard that's used in the law, the court systems, and historical methodologies. Personal testimony does not account for anything when it comes to things that lack an empirical basis. So miracles, magical, mythical creatures, paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, testimony counts for nothing in those contexts.
I don't. I wouldn't. I would not say it counts for nothing, but I understand your point that you need more evidence, let's say, that can correspond to what you have experienced. So yeah, I don't think we use the word experience in exactly the same way. I mean, it's something broader for me. Even the scientists, let's say, that find something, let's say, in archaeology, I would put that also in experience, perhaps. But I lost my train of thought now. I think that, yeah. So maybe, I don't know if you want to move on, but what I can add there is that I know many persons that have had this experience. So it's not like one person isolated sitting in a room and fantasizing about something. And the second thing is that you talk about unicorns, and if you ask me what I was like the least persuasive argument from atheists for me is that they say like, okay, God doesn't exist, unicorns doesn't exist, so believing God is like believing in unicorns, and it feels like some kind of fallacy there, because it's no one is saying that unicorns exist, but many people, serious people, people that have won the Nobel Prize, or many people do believe in God. So it's not just, you're not comparing apples with apples there. So I don't feel it's
the comparison between unicorns and God is the epistemic evidence that indicates them. So the number of people who believe in it is irrelevant here. Like that literally makes no difference. The comparison is the empirical evidence we have for unicorns is exactly equivalent for the empirical evidence we have for God. And therefore we should believe in God at the exact same rate we believe in unicorns. And so the fact that lots of people believe in God shows that their personal biases are the justification, because there is no evidence. I mean, so the comparison is an accurate comparison between the level of evidence for unicorns and the level of evidence for God are comparable. That's the comparison being made. The number of people is just irrelevant. That's not a relevant factor in trying to establish the similarity.
okay. I thought you meant also before that it is relevant in the case that, in the sense that if you're going to do statistics or something like that, it's relevant what people think. I mean, it's quite interesting that we humans have this capacity. So that was maybe we can move on to that. Another thing I wanted to ask you is what do you think brought about this capacity within humans
Evolution.
to have religious experiences, let's say?
Evolution. It's type 1 and type 2 errors, false positives and false negatives, where if you hear a rustle in the bushes and you think it's a lion, you run away every time. If you hear a rustle in the bushes and you think it could be the wind and you want to wait for more scientific information, you get eaten. And therefore, evolution has selected for people who always think that there's a lion in the bushes. And so we have this hyperactive agency detection system that's built into us to always think that there's a monster under the bed, that every dark corner has something hiding in it, that there's always some kind of a demon or a mind behind every kind of disaster, hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever. And that inbuilt psychological bias that is, we know doesn't work, we know it's false, was beneficial to survival, and it causes us to believe in these kinds of mythical beings like gods.
So I think, okay, the problem I have with that answer is lions exist and hunt not only humans, let's say, they hunt a lot of other animals, and so why only humans?
What the same bias is in most animals.
So do you think animals have like religious experiences?
No, they don't have the cognitive complexity in order to impose agency to abstract concepts like we do. So once they do, then they will.
Okay. I still think, like, the caricature, let's say, sometimes you hear on the internet, like, people started to believe in God because lightning was striking down, somewhere, and people said, oh, where did that come from? So it must be God. I mean, there are other animals too, and let's say other monkeys don't have religious experience. At least I don't think so. So it feels like I don't really get an answer often when I ask, let's say, an atheist about this. It's just evolution, and it feels like magic. I don't say that everything about evolution is false, but it's really not an answer why it happens. And maybe the answer is we don't know. I mean, like an atheist, that's a
what's the part that isn't answered here? Because I'm thinking, so
Yeah.
evolution seems to answer why all animals tend to have this hyperactive agency detection system, and then specifically humans is that why we get religion and other things don't get religion is because we have more complex brains that can make more imaginary hidden boxes. So like we can imagine what caused the thunderstorm, whereas animals don't have the cognitive capability in order to ask that question. If they could ask that question, they would think it's a mind just like we do. And so the fact that we have more powerful brains that can ask bigger questions, but then we answer those questions with the same fallacies that are in the animals, explains why we think we can apply the same fallacious reasoning to higher level concepts. I'm not sure why that wouldn't answer the question.
I think it's an answer, but I don't hear proof for that. It's like often in Christian circles, let's say, people say, oh, this happened because God did this or that. And as a Christian, I might accept that. But because we have, let's say, a divide between us in what we believe and think, to just stating like the fact or what you perceive as a fact, like evolution happened and this explains it. Yeah, but many things can explain a certain fact, or it's like, why? So yeah, I don't think you proved your point, let's say, but you stated your conviction of what happened.
I'm not so like we've proven that these fallacies exist. That's been proven. So we know these biases for hyperactive agency detection is a thing that exists in brains.
Sure. But
which is why, like,
okay.
we see if
Yeah.
we when you're watching a scary movie and the lights are off, you have fear of the things in the dark, even though you're in your house. So there's nothing unless something is magically transmuted into your house. There's nothing in the dark. but you still have that sensation because it was beneficial to evolution. Like animals that have that sensation will survive more because sometimes there is stuff in the dark. And so we know that that specific thing has been proven to be an evolved trait due to survivability of evolution, because houses are a relatively new concept where you have a safe space that's protected from like
Sure.
other animals. And so being afraid of something in the dark is very useful. So we know that's been proven to be an evolutionary trait. And through doing studies of like flies and mice, we can show that it's selected for through natural selection. So that's been proven. So I'm not sure which part hasn't been proven here.
Okay, so let me explain more. It becomes like you're begging the question because you assume that religion or belief in, let's say, God, to be more specific, it's false. So therefore, evolution, because we know from evolution that people imagine stuff that benefit their survival, we can put religion in that category, and that explains it. But I don't agree with you that religion is false, let's say. So I could easily use the same argument and put atheism in that. And I can give a personal example.
Well, I would agree. So I would say that you can't just beg the question and assume your position is true, but that's not what I'm doing. So I'm specifically not taking a position on whether God exists or not. I'm specifically just looking at the evidence we have from novel predictions made in the field of biology and science, where you say, here's a thing that is in our brains, which is hyperactive agency detection. And this thing fails 99.999% of the time. It's just automatically you think an agent is there, and it's wrong all the time. And so if there's another instance where we see, oh, I think there's an agent there, the justification for that belief, if there is no evidence that there's an agent there, then all of the evidence indicates that that's just our brain doing the fallacy thing where we assume there's an agent there, because that's mostly what's causing this kind of belief in humans. And so for any case where we think there's a brain there and there's no evidence for it, it's rational to conclude it's just a fallacy of human psychology until we have some kind of independent evidence to indicate that, because we know those feelings are a result of this faulty mechanism in our brain, which we've proven to exist.
Okay, obviously I don't agree with you that there is no evidence. I think there are, beside good arguments, I think the most convincing argument, and this is some atheists agree with this, that some of the most convincing argument is the experience. I think like persons from Cosmic Skeptic, I don't know if you agree with him, but lately he has made the argument that if I have a real, experience of God, I think that would convince me. But the reason I chose to talk about, let's say, Father Ludovicus and his experience, he came to that situation as a skeptic. He thought Porphyrius was a charlatan, and it wasn't just a subjective feeling, like I'm feeling good now because I feel the presence of God. It was something objective. It was another person it became evident, at least for him, and because he's a trustworthy person, and many others independently of him have had exactly the same kind of experiences in a broad sense of Saint Porphyrius. It becomes harder and harder for Christians to accept that argument you make, that it's just illusory or imaginary. I want to give you an example of when what you have said also applies to atheism. So,
I do want to clarify on that point. If there's a fallacy that we know that lots of people experience because it's a fallacy, saying that lots of people experience it wouldn't be evidence to the contrary. That would just be, of course they do. It's a fallacy. We know lots of people experience it. That's why it's one of the named fallacies. So like if you say, oh, people like are compelled by bandwagon fallacies, like of course they are. That's why it's a fallacy. That's why it's a named fallacy. People are compelled by it and we know it's wrong. And so the fact that lots of people have similar fallacious beliefs wouldn't be evidence that they're not fallacious beliefs. It would just be
I agree with that.
okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. What I don't agree with is that when I say that people had this experience with Saint Sophrony, not Sophrony, I'm sorry, his name skipped my mind. Anyway, the saint, I don't. It's not just a subjective experience. So it's more like, let's say I say there is a horse on the front yard, and you said, no, I don't believe you. And then, the police comes, there is a horse on the front, we need to catch it, it has escaped or something like that. Then it becomes more reasonable. So I think that if, let's say, a lot of people believes something, that's not evidence of anything. I mean, there are many atheists, there are many Muslims. I don't believe in everything they have said.
Right. I agree that the number of people who believe something doesn't matter. But your analogy with the horse, like people saying there's horse on the lawn. If you said people saw like an optical illusion, like there's the optical illusion. Have you seen the one where there's a Rubik's Cube and there's the middle squares on the top and the bottom are orange, but one's like looks darker than the other one? It's a really nice Rubik's Cube optical illusion, and it looks like the top one is darker than the middle one. But when you remove all of the background information, they're the exact same color. And so if you have this picture in your front yard and somebody says, oh, look, the top one's darker than the light one, and then they call the cops and the cops come and say the top one's darker than the light one, say, no, that's not actually evidence the top one's darker, because we know this is a fallacy produced by the brain, which we can demonstrate. And so this isn't actually evidence that the top one's darker. We can demonstrate that that's false. And that's more like the analogy you're using with religion, is that we know there's a fallacy that generates these beliefs in people. And so that isn't, no matter how many people come to your front lawn and see this optical illusion, it's never going to be evidence, because we know that there are these fallacies and biases. And so you need something more than just a lot of people see it. You need some kind of novel testable prediction, double-blind studies. Like, it's never going to be evidence that people have experiences of this, because we know those experiences are so bad.
Yeah, I don't think what you have said now, I mean, I agree with your example, but I don't think it's analogous to what we are talking about here. It's not like religion is looking at this object in this from this angle, and then it creates some kind of illusion. I mean, everything you have said now, it could be applied to atheism. So many people believe that there is no God, and we know from evolution that people feel more safe by denying what's in front of them. So, I mean, I could make that argument, and I want.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
I would agree. If that was the only justification that we atheists had, was that we believe this because it gives us comfort or something, then you would be right.
Sure.
But that's no one in atheism is using that as a justification. Our justification is that there's no evidence for this, therefore I'm irrational to believe it, which is a completely rational. That's not a fallacy. There's no fallacy in that justification. It's perfectly rational. And so the justification for atheism isn't based on a fallacy, whereas the justification for theism does seem to be based on a fallacy.
So yeah, I agree with you that if you're making only that point, that you atheists, let's say, have additional reasons for disbelieving in God, it's not enough. And I will just make the same argument, that it's not the case that Christians only rely on subjective feelings. And I don't think that you come to a point when let's say, what is the best explanation, right? If I have subjective feelings about God, which is analogous to, let's say, the feelings I have to my wife, but I also know people having experience, we can call it miraculous events. For me, that's a fact. It's not, maybe I can't demonstrate it for you
Here's the picture. Like, do you see like the center brick in each of the sides? There's like the one on the top looks dark, and the one on the right looks dark, and the one on the left looks really bright.
Yeah.
Those are all the same color. The middle orange ones are all the exact same color. They just look different to our eyes.
Sure.
It's really cool optical illusion.
Yeah, and I don't think that atheist belief in God falls into that category, and I don't think you have.
Well, you mentioned that there's
given
other reasons. So, like, I would say if there are other reasons that indicate God, that could be great evidence. But the personal experience is never going to be good evidence. That's always going to be me looking at this optical illusion. It's going to be analogous to me looking at this optical illusion. So that will never ever be evidence. Me looking at the optical illusion is never going to be evidence. But if you have some other evidence, that's great. That we would be talking about that. But I think there is none. I think there's no evidence at all. But regardless of whether or not there's other evidence, this personal experience example doesn't work because of these optical illusion examples.
Okay, maybe we're going around now, but I would just say again, I don't think it's analogous to an optical illusion, and I don't think we simply can take what we believe is false and correlate that to what we know is false, let's say, or we know is, because that becomes begging the question, at least for me. I mean, meeting a person, talking with him, let's say eating a dinner or having this discussion where he knows things that he can't simply know by mortal means, let's say, it becomes more than an optical illusion. Not all experiences are equal. So let's say for me, I can.
Let me just try to clarify this a little better. So, like the picture I showed you before. Now, I could have been showing you a picture where the sides are actually different colors. Like I could show you a picture that has the optical illusion where they look like they have different colors. And I could show you a picture where they actually have different colors. And you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. They're going to look the same to you. And so we know that our visual representation of just seeing this kind of this color distinction between the sides will never be able to distinguish, is this real, is this fake? Because they're going to look the same. And so we know that because our eyes, our visual experience can't tell the difference between is this real or is this fake, they're never going to be evidence. Our seeing it's never going to tell us, is this real, is this fake? You need something else. And that's the point here, is that because we know that there's a fallacy or a bias that's going to generate this exact same experience as the real thing, then our experience will never be able to tell us the difference. This is never going to be evidence, our personal experience. You need more than that, because you can't tell the difference between is it a real one or is it a fake one. Our psychological biases are going to generate this exact same experience.
Okay, so I have understood your point, but I think I'm not sure you understand me. Maybe my English is it's too Greek to be understood. But let's say like this. Okay, so let's say I grant everything you have said now and apply that to evolution. I say, yeah, you think you find dinosaurs in the ground, but actually, you know, like this, there is this concept of illusion, so it's not really happening. And let's say then 100 more scientists come and, oh, it's in the ground, why are you stupid? Open your eyes, let's say. And no, it's an illusion. Everyone is lying. Everyone is just lying. I mean, maybe that's convincing for some people, but I think for majority people, there is a big leap of faith almost from saying that people often lie or people often see things that is not there, to the conclusion no one has seen it. No, everyone is lying. Everyone is wrong. I think it becomes almost a burden of proof for the atheist to demonstrate that is actually the case, and not just.
Well, so I kind of agree there. Like the number of people who see the fossils is also fallacious. Like you can't ever use that as evidence. That's
so
never
how do we know
evidence.
it's true?
Because it's not the number of people, it's the novel testable predictions. So, like for example, evolutionists predicted that if evolution is true, we would find a fossil of a transitional fossil between a lizard and a fish at a specific strata in 1 kilometer range, specifically in like Iceland or something. They looked and they found it, Tiktaalik. They predicted the exact location we would find this thing in the future, that they didn't know about. Nobody knew about this. And this has happened hundreds of times where they've said, if our hypothesis is true, here is something that we can look for in the world that we haven't discovered yet. And then they look and they find it and they get it right. That's evidence. That is real evidence. That's showing how to differentiate the fallacies from the truth is novel testable prediction. And so the difference between the evolution example that you gave and the personal experience of seeing Jesus or whatever, or our religious experience, is that one of them is used to be able to make a model that can tell us about the future, the things that we don't know yet, and get things right all the time. And one can't.
Mm.
And so the model that can accurately tell us about the future and get things right has evidence that it's true, independent of the fact that it's personally experienced. That part is just, I agree, that personal experience isn't evidence either way. It's the novel testable predictions that's the evidence that separates one from the other.
Okay, yes, I think it seems like we agree on some level and disagree on another. I think what you have said now, you're still talking about experience. You can still say, like, when, so you say, okay, I agree that people finding skeletons, let's say, in the ground is not evidence enough. I mean, for me, it would be evidence enough, but anyway, but what did you say is the decisive factor that
Novel
that is,
testable
let's say,
predictions.
can you explain that?
Okay, so you're right, it's still an experience, but there's different kinds of experience. One is the ability
Yes,
to predict the
exactly.
future. What that doesn't matter. So one is the ability to predict the future accurately, regularly, consistently. And the other is just having an experience. So having an experience in the present is just, well, there's lots of ways to explain that. But if you have a model that can predict the future and can do it accurately and consistently, there's a reason to believe whatever that model is. Because most of our imagination is very bad at predicting the future. So most of our models cannot predict the future. It's very hard to predict the future. And so if you have a model that can accurately predict the future and it gets it right, that's evidence that your model is correct. So in evolution, the fact that they can predict the future consistently all the time and get it right all the time is a really good evidence that evolution is true. Whereas just having the experience, having religious experience, can't predict the future. So there's no reason to believe that one's true any more than any other psychological made up thing that has no basis. So the difference there is some models can accurately predict the future. Those are the ones that we built science on, are the ones that can accurately predict the future. And the ones that can't accurately predict the future are things that we don't have reason to believe.
Okay, I have so many thoughts now, but you speak about the future, and what's interesting about it doesn't exist. That we, I think, all agree about. So you don't
Not
experience.
exactly. It's like in physics, there's multiple different theories of time, tensed versus non-tensed, where the future and the past do actually exist. So that's not really a solved problem in physics yet.
Okay, but let's say in a normal discussion, when you use the word future, you mean something that will, let's say, happen.
Yep.
Otherwise, your argument doesn't work if you're just speaking about the present. But anyway, but when you then experience the future, you don't experience it as future, you experience it as now, as present. So then your evidence is relating to another thing that doesn't exist, the past, in a sense. So how, I mean, I don't say I disagree, but if you're going to say an experience like the one Ludovicus had is the same kind of experience like an illusion, an optical illusion, then I think everything you have said could be spoken about as an experience that can't be proved. How do we prove anything, really? How do we know anything? How do you know I think? You would probably say, because I experience my thoughts.
Well, none of that matters. That level of the conversation is just irrelevant. So we agree that we have experiences. We agree there's a future. We agree that we're in the present. We agree that I can make a prediction, like I'm going to eat dinner tonight or something. So all of the current, what the world is like kind of things we agree upon. And what matters is can I make a model that can predict our future, what both of us are going to experience, or can you? And we can test that. We can say, I have a prediction that we're going to discover fossils if we go look in a location, and we can go look together. We can see the fossils, and then you can try to make a prediction based on your religious experience, and we can see if it happens. So whether or not we're in the matrix, those kind of like hyper skeptical questions just don't matter here. What matters is we're on equal footing. We can both make hypotheses, and we can both test to see if they're correct. And one of them, like evolution, has been confirmed, and we can both go confirm it whenever we want. But religious experience has never been confirmed, and so that's really the testing point here.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. If you want to continue.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that I don't know. I don't want to be offensive, but I feel like you're exaggerating your point. So the religious view is no evidence, nothing at all. It's just an illusion, and believing that you have had predictions in the past, or believing that something like the future exists. To deny that just extreme views of skepticism. But of course, when I give you an example of a person that encounters a person in a context and in a religious context, and this person is not kind of like a guru, that we all critique, that fool people to get money or something, but truly the meeting of a truly saintly person, and he knows a poem you written in your diary yesterday. I agree with you that that's not in itself a proof for everyone, but for that person, if you don't think something is going on here, you're starting to deny. It's Scooby-Doo, they say something like that, when does skepticism turn into denial? And I have myself had this kind of experiences, so I don't need to trust another person. I know for myself some of these kind of things. So for me, at least, it becomes totally unconvincing that you're just denying all kinds of these experiences and put them in the category of falsehood. I don't. Yeah. So maybe you want to move on now. I think we have, or you want to say something else about this.
I'd say that those kinds of experiences have never ever been able to make future testable predictions accurately. Therefore, and they've been false consistently. Therefore, that's not a reliable source of information. So it's just as simple as that. Like the fact that you have an experience, that's fine to build a hypothesis. You can say, I've had this experience, I think it's true. And then like, that's great. Now go make a testable prediction. And if you can confirm it, then you have evidence. But until you've made some testable prediction that has been confirmed, you have nothing. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that theists have no evidence. I'm being quite literal. I think theism has zero evidence, nothing. And so if you had some evidence, that would be great. We could talk about that too. But the personal experience is definitely provably not evidence of any kind, because it can never make testable predictions and then once you make testable predictions, great, you got evidence.
So I think that enabled for a person to have an experience, I think that at least on some level correlates to something true, even if the person that is thinking there is a lion behind the bush, but there isn't a lion behind the bush, that doesn't mean that this capacity of detecting individuals, persons, or things is just futile. I think it's otherwise it wouldn't, from my evolutionary perspective, it wouldn't have come up in but
right, I agree.
Yeah,
but that's where you need new evidence. So like your perception that there is a thing is nothing, but then you need more evidence, and once you have more evidence, then that's great. So you can use it as a way to build a hypothesis and then test the hypothesis, but just using the personal experience is never going to be evidence. You need that independent way to test the hypothesis. So it's not futile, it's just a starting point, but the starting point on its own isn't evidence.
I think from an Orthodox perspective, I agree with you, but maybe in a surprising way. I agree with you because there is a concept in religion too of heresy, let's say, or delusion. There is words like delusion or heresy or schism. So there is also in a religious framework the concept of that you have delusionary thoughts about God, or this is not true, and it just people can open the Bible and read, and there is always some kind of polemic, or this is not true, and so. But on the topic of, so I agree with you that there can be and are often delusionary thoughts about God or something like that. So. But I don't fully agree. It seems like you talk about knowing the future as the only valid way to know something, and I'm sure you don't mean that, but you brought that up as something against to what I have presented as some kinds of evidence, at least. So I don't agree with that conclusion that you need to be able to predict the future, being able to know something, because many sciences is not they're not trying to predict the future, let's say. So that would count all of these sciences as non-science, let's say, and I think that I don't think that's right. Another thing I want to comment that you said is that there is a beneficial element to religious belief, and that's why it came about or persisted. And I think that's also kind of true, but also not true. I mean, there are, like, take for example Christianity. You have the concept of martyrs, for example, or so. I don't think the beneficial element of, let's say, a man running in the forest or not in the savannah and says, there is a lion there, but I will go to heaven, so I'll just stand here and get eaten. I don't see the benefit of that. And the other thing I want to just point to, and as you have said, I think you agree with that, is that atheists can also be, you can also understand the atheism as a denial of something that is true. So you have focused on the concept of falsehood, but there is also a concept of denying what's in front of you. So, for example, when I was a child, I saw maybe a scary movie, and I wanted to go up to my room to go to sleep, but the stairs there are gaps between the stairs. So I was afraid, so I was running. But then I thought to myself, but there are no ghosts. There are no ghosts. Why are you afraid? Now, maybe some say there is no ghost, but I was actually using atheism to comfort myself, to not be afraid. So that's also, I think, a factor we can weigh into that. But I don't think you disagree with that. You have said
right. I would agree with that. Yeah. I would say that if the only justification for atheism was the comfort, then it would be equally as irrational as theism. So I would grant that it's both fallacious in the context of atheism and in the context of theism to simply believe based on a fallacy. You would need some kind of independent evidence. Atheism has that, theism doesn't. The second thing you said was that theism can be detrimental because you could believe you could go to heaven, therefore you wouldn't run away from the lion. Well, the heaven belief was beneficial for other reasons, for getting people to work through harsh situations, thinking they're going to get a reward after death, which made them gave them a lot of social cohesion and comfort in situations they couldn't control. So even though it may be detrimental, I agree religion is very detrimental in many cases, but overall back in the past it was beneficial. I don't know what that was related to. And the first one you said, you don't have to know the future. That's not necessarily the only way to know things, but you would need to provide another way to know things. And all of the sciences, there's no justification in science that can lead to religious belief. So all of the different methodologies in science use an empirical basis, which is novel testable predictions. And then once things have a basis in empirical reality, then you can start using it on an implicit empirical basis, which is history and law. And so history and law don't use novel testable predictions. They don't try to predict the future unless you're doing like archaeology or something. But they're only allowed to use things that have been able to predict the future in the past. So like in history, there's a paper by Michael Licona, Historians and Miracle Claims, where he goes through the methodology of history and shows that the vast majority of historians don't allow any kind of mention of miracles, magic, mythical creatures, paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, because those don't have an empirical basis, and so no amount of testimony counts as evidence for them, even in the historical past. And so in the fields of science that don't try to make prediction, they're not allowed to insert new ontologies. You can never discover something new in a field that doesn't predict the future. The only ones that can discover new things are the ones that predict the future. And so you can definitely justify things after they've been shown to exist. But if you ever want to infer a new thing that exists in the world, the novel testable predictions is the only way to do that, as far as I know, until a new methodology has been presented. And God would fit in that category of the new things you need evidence for.
Okay, I think, yeah, sure. I still think that, first of all, God is not an object in that sense. I mean, some Christians treat that God like that, but that's not the historical Christian view. And it's quite funny, because I can, in a Christian way, say I'm an atheist and don't believe in God, that God exists, because some Christians in the beginning were accused of being atheists because they denied the gods. And I think Gregory the theologian said that if I exist, then God doesn't exist, and if God exists, then I don't exist. And his point was that we use the word existence in different ways. So that brings us to apophatic theology and so on. Of course, I believe in God's existence, but I think, yeah, I'm not sure why I mentioned that, but
yeah, you said something like God isn't an object. By object here, I just mean a thing that exists. So does God exist?
Not as a thing that exists. He is existence. So,
well, that would be fine. So like, when we're saying we're trying to demonstrate a new ontology, we're just trying to say there is a new class of things. It could be what makes up everything. That's fine. You could say, like, if all particles are made of miniature leprechauns, that would be something you need to demonstrate with future predictions. If you want to say that there's some substance that permeates the universe, you need to demonstrate that with new predictions. So if you're trying to go beyond the things we already know exist and say there is some other kind of thing there that we don't know about, regardless in what way you think it exists, in order to justify that, you would need novel testable predictions, unless you could provide some alternative methodology to differentiate imagination from reality. You need some method to go beyond and show that. Just personal experience just doesn't cut it.
Sure. I think that you said that really, okay, first of all, I think people have made arguments for God's existence. Maybe you don't think they are successful. Successful, thank you. But I think if we are more modest, I think that we can say that they are more than nothing, at least from an atheist perspective. They bring something to the table that people can discuss. And some of these arguments have made predictions, like the world, the cosmos started to exist. So I think that that's a prediction. So I think these kind of things happen. But in any case, it's hard for us, because there is a divide, let's say, and it's a big divide between you and me in what we believe, how we see the world. So there are a lot of things that you say that I don't agree with in the way you say it. So it's hard for me to interact with every point you have made. And one of those things is that no, you mentioned. Okay, forget that. So I don't know how you want to move on from here, if you want to move on, but I think that you came back to the argument that there needs to be a prediction, but when you're doing that, you're making a truth claim, that falls outside of that paradigm you have not made up, but yeah, the paradigm of you need to be able to predict the future in some sense in order for something to be true. That statement is let's say a logical statement that doesn't fall into that category itself. So the question becomes, how do you know that that's true? Or how do you know that your thoughts exist, or that you have a conscience? And you can say that, oh, that's extreme, but I think there are valid questions, because the atheist needs to be able to respond to everything and not to take for granted the existence of people or the existence of a religious experience or the possibility. Let's say we have thirst, so there is something like water. We have hunger, there is something like food. This is an argument C.S. Lewis has made. So I think that the very existence of a spiritual hunger is in itself an argument for the existence of God. But I don't agree that no predictions have been made, despite of everything I've said. I think the creation of the world out of nothing, even if theologians and physicists maybe don't use the word nothing in the same sense, which is quite funny. So I think it goes at least to that direction and gives theism a better probability. Yeah.
So the three things there I'd say is hyper-skeptical arguments like how do we know we exist? They just don't matter. It's just a different level of conversation. So it's like it would invalidate both hypotheses equally. And so that just doesn't matter. So the next stage is, once we grant we're not a brain in the vat, which one can differentiate imagination from reality better? And I'm saying I can do that. Novel Tesla predictions can do that better than any other method that you've provided. And so the hyper-skeptical stuff just doesn't matter because it invalidates both equally, and so it's not relevant to the conversation. So we can filter it out just like it's in a math equation. It applies to both. It's not important. And then we need to say, what method do you have to differentiate imagination from reality? Does it compare to my method, and which one's better? If you think you have novel testable predictions, that would be great. We can talk about other forms of evidence that you have. That would be a place to go. I don't think there are any arguments or evidence that work. I think they can be proven that they do not work. Therefore, they are not evidence. And so if that's the case, then there is no more evidence for God than there is for unicorns. And so providing evidence that you think could work would be an interesting topic to move on to. But I think that if you think you have a different methodology that can differentiate imagination from reality that is comparable to my methodology, then that would also potentially work too.
Sure. So let me ask you this. What you have said now is a truth claim, right? A statement that corresponds to truth. So maybe you can talk about that. How do you know that that's true, what you have said, given the paradigm you have talked about?
Well, my epistemology starts with I think, therefore I am, I exist, I have an experience. There's some difference between my imagination and my experience. So like if I imagine a unicorn, I don't see it in front of me. So there's two different classes of things, the classes of things that I experience, the classes of things that I imagine. And I need some way to differentiate between the two. The way that I differentiate between the two is through novel testable predictions. I have some idea in my head that is able to predict the future accurately. Most of my ideas are not able to predict the future accurately. Therefore, the ones that are able to predict the future accurately tend to accurately correspond to the things I'm experiencing rather than the things I'm imagining. Therefore, if it's a part of my future testable predictions model, it's rational to include as a part of the experiential things, not the imaginary things. So now I have a method that can differentiate imagination from experience, and I can use that to build science and the world that we see around us. That's my theory of knowledge.
So I think what's interesting about what you've said that is that you put also, I think you made the argument I'm trying to make, that there is a difference between imagining something and having a true experience. And I will add to that, to deny something. I think that's a part also of the history of humankind, that we tend to deny what we don't like, so or don't wish to be true. But I think the question becomes that you said that you can correct me if I'm wrong. You said that I know that I have thoughts because I experience them. Is that what
Sure.
you believe?
Yes, I think therefore I am.
So,
Yes.
sure. And okay. So, but how do you count for, let's say, consciousness then? Because that presupposes that, I think.
Well, it doesn't presuppose it, because presuppositions are things you assume are true before you make an argument. Well, I'm not assuming consciousness is true. It's literally something that exists in front of me. It's or as me. And so it's not a presupposition that
Literally
consciousness.
exist in front of you?
Yeah.
It literally don't.
What? So the consciousness literally.
Consciousness is it sit in front of you?
Yeah, it's not in front of me, but it is me. So it's an existing object. It's not a presupposition. It's like a rock. Here's an object. It exists. And so consciousness isn't a presupposition. It is an actually existing object. You don't need to presuppose it. You don't. How I account for that comes later down the road. Like after we have a way to differentiate imagination from experience, and we can make predictions and discover things about the world, then once we know things about the world, we can use those to build models of what we think created us, which I think is evolution. But that's way down the line after we discuss things about the world.
So okay, so let's say consciousness is here, your thoughts are here, but you're starting with your thoughts as the basic, right? You begin with I have thoughts, so
Yeah.
therefore I know exist, and then you go up the chain, and then you return to consciousness in some way. But all that in all that chain, let's say of logical steps, you're still using consciousness. So the fundamental. So what do you think about that? Is that how do you account for consciousness, or do you think is that like a priori factual for you that consciousness exists?
Well, it's so we start with consciousness. We know consciousness exists because we're literally it. We are consciousness. So if we directly experience it, it exists. We don't know why it exists yet. That part we don't answer first. First, we start with we exist, and then there are differences between the things we're experiencing, and we can build models of the world. And then once we learn things about the world, we can then try to infer why or how consciousness exists. I think it's just material higher order emergent property of material stuff that comes to us from a long line of testable data that we can get from the world. So we don't start with how does consciousness exist? We start with consciousness exists. And then we have to learn about the world and try to infer from those things that we learn why or how it exists.
Okay, sure. I think we can talk about this a long time for a long time. I think that I don't think I think therefore I miss the let's say the ground you start with. I think there are deeper ways to or questions that you need to answer first before you can say that you have thoughts. I mean, it feels like you start to enter in the area where I am sitting, let's say, and talking about experience as the fundamental principle of how you know anything at all. And so I don't know, I don't see, maybe you can help me to see that how does that relate to what you have said earlier, that you need to be able to what do you say? Well, you know, see into the future, not see into the future, make predictions and that kind of stuff. But your starting point isn't that. It's, you can almost say faith in a broader sense, not in a, you know, strict sense. It's starting on relying on, I have a brain, I have thoughts, it's working, it's giving me the right kind of perceptions, and based on that, I can make predictions about the world, the future exists, the past have existed or has existed. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, or do you see what I'm saying?
Not exactly. So my
Okay.
my argument goes something like we start with experience necessarily. Like epistemic skepticism, or epistemic solipsism is what it's called. Like, we must literally start with our direct experience. Like, there's nothing you can't start with anything else. You have to start with your direct experience, because all thoughts are direct experience. So to have any kind of thought or proposition, it has to be an experience first. And then once we have that, we try to build models of the things we experience, like the world. And we know that there's some difference between our imagination and our experience, because, like, I imagine a unicorn, I don't see one. There's a difference between there. So we use our consciousness to try to discover things about what we're experiencing. Like, that's just the fact. And through the methods that we have used through the past 4,000 years or whatever, we know some methods work, some methods don't. And the reason we've come to this is novel testable predictions is the one that works. That's science. So, like, the whole origin of the method of science is the reason why we think science works. But we need some way to tell, because there's different classes of things we experience. We accept that, like unicorns and TVs are separate. And so we need some way to differentiate the classes of things we're experiencing. Science works to do that. And so if you have a different method, that would be great. I don't think there is a different method that works well. And once we have this method that we know that works accurately to differentiate kinds of things, we can use that to learn, like, oh, this is a fallacy, this is a bias, this doesn't work, this method fails. And personal experience method, we know, fails. That one does not work. That one cannot accurately differentiate, is this one of the unicorn things or one of the TV things? Whereas science can do that. That's why it's important here, is because if there's one method that can accurately differentiate between the two and one method that cannot accurately differentiate between the two, then we shouldn't trust the one that doesn't work. And which leads back to the argument of why we don't trust personal experience, why we do trust science.
I think, I don't know, maybe I don't understand you, but from what I'm hearing you're arguing for a particular method, but you're using all the time another method, the method of I have thoughts, I believe, I'm conscious. That's not a scientific method, isn't it? To I exist, I think, therefore I am. That's something else, right?
What? I'm not following. Like, I think therefore I am. That's not science, correct? That is not the scientific method. The scientific method is how you differentiate different kinds of experience.
Sure. So maybe I misunderstood you, because so you believe that there are other ways to know things except through the scientific method, and in fact the primary method you're using to be able even to do science is not the scientific method, it's the method of I believe in my conscience, let's say.
Well, that's not a method, that's just a description of a fact. So yes, you can know things by, like, if it exists as a fundamental feature of yourself, then you know it, obviously. So since I am made of consciousness, I know consciousness exists. So that would be another way to know things, sure. But that only applies to literally one thing, which is consciousness or yourself, and that's it. So yes, there is another way to know things, which is existing as the thing. That would be another way to know things, yes. But it only applies to literally one thing.
Yes, but that only one thing is then you're building everything else you know about the world, let's say, on that one thing.
Yeah.
The faith in, let's say, yourself in something like that. Okay, so I think we agree and have established that there are other ways except the scientific method to know things. So that, I think, leaves the question open: can you know God except through a scientific method? And so I mean, that's a big question that I don't think we have time to go into, but I can just state what the Orthodox believe about some of that. In Orthodox Christian theology, we are making a distinction between discursive thinking, and the immediate experience of something that's called nous, let's say, or sometimes translated as mind. And I think there is a capacity in human beings to have a direct experience of the divine that is uniquely given to human beings and not shared by other animals. So I think that is a valid way to know God, through direct experience, analogous to the way you know, let's say, that you are conscious. Or maybe another way to say this that is perhaps easier for your audience to understand what I mean is, let's say, how do you know that there exist moral truths? I think also there you have a field, let's say, that falls outside the typical scientific, in a strict way, methodology. So, yeah.
Well, you would have to demonstrate that. Like, my methodology for knowing I exist is essentially undoubtable. So I know that I exist, but you haven't shown that there's some kind of direct experience of another alternative thing that actually works. Like, I know of no other cases where direct experience of the thing works other than I exist. So you would have to demonstrate that actually works. Like, I can demonstrate it in my case. I exist because I have direct experience. Like, I can't to have direct experience and not exist. That's a logical contradiction, but there's no logical contradiction with having an experience of a different thing and it not existing. We see that all the time. So this idea that you have a direct experience of some alternative thing is exactly like the unicorn or the TV. Like, we don't know if it's real or not, but having a direct experience of myself is not like the unicorn or the TV. It's a third kind of thing because it can't be doubted in that context. So you would need to show how your direct experience of God in that context would somehow be better than the unicorn.
I'm not competing, let's say, methods, but I think there are more ways than just one to establish something is true. And
you would need, like, there could
there
be infinitely, but you'd have to demonstrate them. You would have to provide that there's a different method. I can justify my method for I exist and science. You would need to justify whichever method you think is an alternative.
Okay. So let me give you an example. Let's say the laws of logic. How, do you think that it falls into self-evident in the sense that it's in me, or do you think it's scientific evidence, or do
Yeah,
you
it's in
think
you.
it's a third thing?
It's in you. It's a language that you use to describe your experience. So it's in you.
So you don't think it's you don't think it's, let's say, objective?
Well, like, logic doesn't exist objectively. No, it's a language like English to describe stuff. Like, stuff exists in a nature objectively. Like, I think therefore I am is logical. So it's in you, just like I think therefore I am.
So I'm trying to follow you. So if humans didn't exist and there was no one to say that 1 and plus 1 is 2, is that then, is it false to say that 1 plus 1 is true, 2?
So truth is a property of sentences. Sentences are things made up by minds, and for a sentence to be true or false, either it corresponds to reality or it does not correspond to reality. So for the sentence 1 plus 1 equals 2, you need a mind to imagine the sentence, and then the sentence to be true means it corresponds to reality, but the sentence doesn't exist. The sentence, like truth, like if you ask, is a table true? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Does the table exist? Like, that sentence makes sense because it corresponds to exact reality. So sentences don't like exist in and of themselves. They are describing something in reality that exists.
Okay, so I think that I don't agree with that truth is only the, maybe you
Property of
didn't mean that.
sentences.
Yeah, I think that truth can be, especially if you're going into a Christian direction or a, say, ancient philosophy, they think of truth as more like, or the ancient philosophers, as I have understood them, more like something that lasts, let's say. So if you say, like, is this true, what I have said? Is it true that I have a table in front of me? You say, yes, it's true. But something can be, let's say, true in the sense that it's true, it's everlasting, it can't go out of existence, so it's also true. I think so. You can, in a sense, say that the table is true, but maybe in the usual way we are thinking about truth, it feels strange to say that, but it's true in the sense it does actually exist. What did you else say? I forgot. Did you make another point?
I don't think so. I don't know. I was just answering your question there about truth. I think that's all I said.
I don't remember my question either. So, but sure, okay. So since I don't remember what I asked you.
Well, I was asking you that.
Yeah,
is there another
logic.
method?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay. So, if then there is no mind, a human mind, let's say, that can say 1 + 1 is 2. The fact that 1 + 1 is 2, not the sentence, the fact. Doesn't that follow that there needs to be another mind, from your perspective, that can, for mathematics to work, let's say, for mathematical truth or logical truth to be true?
So like the sentence, dinosaurs exist or something. If no human mind existed, but the sentence dinosaurs exist would still be true if someone uttered it at the time of dinosaurs. That isn't because there needs to be some mind who can utter the sentence. It's because the sentence would correspond to reality at that time. So the fact that reality has dinosaurs would make that sentence true, even though there's no minds to say the sentence. So the fact that 1 + 1 = 2 is made true because it describes reality, not because you need a mind to say the sentence. So it wouldn't make a difference to me whether there is a mind to say 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 = 2 would be true because it describes reality, and you don't need a mind for that. You just need reality for that.
Okay, I think what I'm trying to get to is that I think the idea that the only thing we can know something is through strictly scientific truth, I think that's false. I mean, we are talking now and we presume that what we are saying is true, and we're presuming that.
I already said that. I don't care if you think that there's other ways. You would need to present them. So I can grant that there are other ways. You would just need to present them.
Okay, I understand you now. Yeah, sorry. So then I will say, yeah. So where is the disagreement? You mean you have not seen someone demonstrate another way to know God? I think that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, without going into each field, people have made arguments for the existence of God. I think even if you personally isn't persuasive of that, and to be frank, I'm not persuasive. I have theological reasons to disbelieve in some of the arguments that, let's say, the scholastic made. So it doesn't need to be that we are disagreeing on the falsehood of some of the arguments, but I think there are successful arguments to be made. Another field is direct experience. Let's say. Okay.
Well, that one would be the thing we've already talked about. So go into an argument. Pick an argument you think is successful.
It's sure. There are many arguments, but I'm not so sure how good I can present them. That's the reason why I'm hesitating. But I think there is something to be said about the argument that, you know, the argument that that, you know, the universe started to exist out of nothing. So that points to a creator. I think even if you, as an atheist, maybe can come up with alternative explanations, I think the most fitting explanation, and what is, let's say, fitting in the rest of our other religious experiences in a broad sense. Yeah, I don't know. So let's say that argument, that because, you know, the word came out of nothing, that seems to point to something immaterial as its cause. But maybe you can say it's multiverses or something like that as a response.
Well, if the universe came out of nothing, immaterial would be a something. So I don't think something can come from nothing. I think that's a logical contradiction. So the universe had to have come from something. That part I would agree with. But there's no reason to think it's immaterial. There's just no logical connection between the universe exists or came to exist, therefore it came from an immaterial thing. Like, that doesn't follow. And so if we're saying the origin of the universe is somehow evidence of something, what's the best explanation for the origin of the universe? Well, the best explanation would be quantum fields, the things that we have evidence for in physics. There's no evidence to conclude that it's a mind, that it's a non-physical object, that it's non-space. Well, space and time, it can be outside of space and time, but that's, again, no reason to think it's a god. So there's absolutely nothing, as far as I can tell, that in any way indicates that the origin of the universe came from a god of any kind of description, as opposed to something in physics. Like, all the evidence seems to say the things in physics are the best explanation of the origin of the universe, not a god.
So even if you think that there is, let's say, a dot in the beginning that have existed eternally, all the masses or energy that exists today, right, can't fit, let's say, into that dot. So even if you believe that some part of the universe existed eternally, but you still have to say how something can come out of nothing in the long run.
Well, I don't think anything came out of nothing ever. So
you
like,
think
either there was like a god.
Eternal?
Yes, well, like, God isn't nothing. God is a something. So if the universe came from God, it's still not nothing. So the options are: was there a God before the universe, or was there some other physics something before the universe? And it seems more reasonable to say that there was a physics something before the universe, not a God. It doesn't seem like there's any rationality to conclude there was a God prior to the universe. That just seems to be like an anthropocentric fallacy.
Okay, I think to be more precise in the language, I don't believe that the universe came out of God. That will make the universe
Right.
God,
I wasn't being
eternal,
literal. I was just saying that something
just
prior to the
clarify,
universe made the universe.
Yeah, if we can speak about prior to the universe, but I think from time, space. But my understanding of physics, and I'm no way an expert, is that the universe had a beginning, but there is a point in the history of the Big Bang, let's say, the evolution of the universe. We can't go, at least for now, more back. So we can't see, let's say, the first millisecond of the event. But scientists, from what I have heard, are talking about the beginning of the universe. So maybe you can explain, if I have what you think about that. Do you disagree with them, or?
Well, they are discussing the beginning of our universe, not the beginning of all physical stuff. So when they say the beginning of our universe, they all of the modern versions of physics think that there's something prior to our universe. String theory, multiverse, quantum fields, quantum particle. None of them think that our universe is it, and there's nothing else, or very few of them. The consensus of physics is that there is more before our universe, but our universe began to exist.
Okay, I think that we are almost entering into the field of I mean, there are theories I know that predict, let's say, a multiverse, that they change, let's say, the constants or something like that, enabled to be able to produce a universe. But I don't think that it seems very hypothetical at that point. The only universe we do know about is our universe.
The point here is that when physicists say the universe began to exist, they mean ours. They don't mean all natural stuff. That's not a conclusion of physics.
But they don't know about any other natural stuff.
Right. They don't know. The question, we don't know about a God. We don't know about other natural stuff. We don't know about whatever created the universe. We don't know. But the question is which is the better explanation? And in physics, when they say the universe began to exist, they mean that the better explanation is a different other physical thing that created our universe. That seems to be like the better explanation than a God did it. So I agree, we don't know of what created the universe, but which is the better explanation? A prior physical thing that's a combination of principles, particles, and laws in physics, or a God.
Yeah, I don't believe it's a more plausible explanation, since both physics, space, and time is created at the moment of the creation of the universe, the Big Bang. So yeah, but I don't want to speak about things that I have not studied systematically. But
Well,
that's the
I agree. So
impression
I agree with the beginning of space-time. Most physicists agree that space and time are emergent, so they come from other physical things. So I agree that space and time began to exist at the Big Bang, but still there's other physical stuff before that.
I mean, that's an hypothesis that maybe there was a prior universe, or there's some kind of cycle or something, but the exceeding expansion of the universe and its acceleration, I think it points to something else, right? That there were no universe, let's say, prior to our universe.
Wait, why would that? So nothing in physics seems to indicate, like, even if there was no universe prior, that still wouldn't indicate a God. But why do you think that because space and time had a beginning, therefore it couldn't have begun by an unknown physical thing that we don't know about yet? Why would it need to be a God?
I have not made the argument it must be a God, because I don't think this kind of
Right.
argument.
So why would it be more
Yeah.
likely that it would be a God than an unknown physical thing?
I mean, there are many different ways to address that, but if we go back to what you have said previously in the discussion, that when we make predictions, the person, let's say, or the theory that can make predictions and we see that they are true, it gives some kind of evidence of the theory itself. I think the framework of this discussion is, did God create the universe, or has it existed forever? So let's say the theists won this debate, let's say, if you agree with that terminology. And then aftermath, people like, no, but it could be an invisible unicorn, or maybe there was a million kinds of universes that no one can detect anyway, that created our universe. And sure, but given the context of our discussion and given the two different predictions, let's say a prediction that atheists made or a prediction Christians were making, it seems like the Christian has, given what you have said earlier, that they made the prediction and it came true. So it seems like they are, at least for this argument, right about
Which prediction?
That the universe had a beginning.
Well, again, in physics, all that means is a part of stuff began to exist. So, like, if you said the world had a beginning and didn't exist forever, like, yeah, we would agree with that. It's kind of the exact same thing here. So when they say the universe began to exist, it's no different from saying the world began to exist or the continent of America began to exist. It's just another thing in the universe that had change over time. That's not a prediction made by theism, or like I don't know of any models that actually predict that literally nothing has changed ever. That, like, pretty much everything that we know about has come from some prior existing thing. So there wasn't like a difference in prediction there, other than like the scientists who said there was like a steady state universe, like that. That was a different prediction. Sure,
David
but
Hume, I think, made that argument, if I'm right.
He's one
Or
of them
maybe
too.
I'm wrong.
But scientists have always been predicting both. Like, there's not like science predicted only one. Like, they've predicted both. There wasn't a.
I think, I think there was some kind of opposition when the theory of Big Bang was starting to emerge. So
I'm talking about even before that. Even before that, scientists predicted both. So
can you give an example? I am not aware of that.
Yeah. So
scientist.
scientists predicted like an eternal past to the universe, and that our segment of the universe was a part of like a cyclic universe. A cyclic universe was a hypothetical. And so in that place, the universe had a beginning, and then like the big crunch, where it went up and down and up and down. That would be an example. Or that our universe was created by a different universe, which was created by a different universe, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's many different there was many alternatives that said that our universe had a beginning. It was just created by something else that didn't have a beginning.
But I mean, I know there are theories that try to give alternatives to the let's say the reason to the Big Bang, but I don't think there are
Well, no,
only
this is
on
before.
the.
I'm talking before Big Bang. So
Yeah,
before we
I
knew anything about.
understand what you say. Even Hindus, let's say, thought
Yeah.
about recycling and such, but I think the evidence as we have it, let's say that the universe is not slowing down, it is expanding, can rule out some of those theories. And
No. So like one of the Big Crunch hypothesis models that is today, a modern version, is that dark energy is going to reverse at some time and that cause everything to collapse back together again. Kind of like how gravity was repulsive at the early universe and became attractive later on. There's a similar hypothesis for dark energy, that it will become attractive later on. So the current evidence doesn't refute any of those. And so it's not like, but I don't know if that, because the point was, were there predictions made for both a beginning to the universe and an eternal universe for theism and atheism? Yes, both people made those predictions, and there's only two. Like that's a 50-50. Either it began to exist or it didn't begin to exist. So that's not really.
Dawkins made that argument, but
Yeah.
I don't agree. Yeah, I don't agree. You can say frame it like that, because if the one prediction is so contra-intuitive that something came out of nothing, that I mean, it's like saying, there are only two possibilities, that there is a dinosaur in New York or there isn't. Well, most people say there isn't because it's the more logical. So the Christian made something, the argument for the existence of, or the beginning of the universe out of nothing, which the Christians made, or also the
Well, no,
Jews.
again, the Christians don't say it came out of nothing. They say it came out of God. So this is, I think, where the confusion is.
No,
That
no.
no,
It
no,
came
no,
up, God.
just to clarify, when the options are that something existed prior to the universe or not, those are the two options. And pretty much everybody thinks something existed prior to the universe. Only a very small portion of people think something did not exist prior to the universe. And it doesn't matter what that prior is. It could be a god, could be a cyclic universe, could be a multiverse. I don't care. But the vast majority of people, both before now and after Big Bang hypothesis, thought there was something prior to the universe.
As I said before, I don't think the terminology, we can speak of God before or after, or but anyway, I understand what you're saying, so that's the most important point here. Yeah, but I still think, to recap, that the evidence we have today is that everything we know that exists had a beginning. That's what we pretty much know. Then the question is, how do we explain that? And for me, to all the hypotheses you made are, it's not, scientists are making them, and they should look for explanations, but they have no evidence for those explanations. So it becomes just hypotheses that maybe some are more likely than others, but I still think that God indeed created the universe. So there is two different arguments really here. One is God as the source of the universe in the way that he created it. But there is also the argument that some have made, that even if the universe was eternal, it still has to have some source of reason for being there. Why is there something rather than nothing? I'm sure you have heard that argument many times. But yeah, as I said, I'm not an expert in a way so that I can elaborate on that. And I'm not sure everything people say about those arguments are successful. I have a religious reason to doubt this methodology of studying some things and then come to the conclusion that therefore God. I'm a bit hesitant about that methodology myself. So I have not my thoughts about this are not totally, let's say, yeah, I need to think more about this and able to give more logical presentation.
Yeah, I would just say that from my perspective, I don't think that would count as evidence, because it's like saying a pineapple created the universe or something. Like, all of our examples of pineapples only exist as a product of evolution, and so to say that a pineapple existed prior to the universe and created it is incoherent. And it's far more plausible to say that quantum fields did it, or that something in physics did it, because those actually have a basis in reality as potentially existing before the universe, whereas pineapples have no potential basis of existing before the universe. And the same thing would apply to minds or consciousness. And so I think that it's always going to be a better explanation that physics stuff did it than a god did it, because I don't think a god would ever be a plausible explanation here. It'd be like a pineapple. It'd be like saying here's a mind thing can exist prior to space-time, which just doesn't make sense.
I mean, it's funny that you mentioned the pineapple, because from my perspective, it's closer to your argument than to mine argument. And you say, well, how's that? Because you're still talking about created things that gave rise to the beginning of the universe. So the pineapple as a created thing is closer to that explanation than to the uncreated cause, which would be the will of God.
So my argument here is that things we already have a basis exist, like positing a new ontology, like things that can't be or haven't been created. There's no basis for that other than our imagination. There's no empirical evidence or something of things that haven't been created. And so if we're using the kinds of evidence that we can show are not purely imaginary, we know pineapples are like a thing that's of the history of stuff. There's like physics, chemistry, biology, pineapples. Pineapples come way, way after the physics. So the physics, if we're saying what caused the physics, is going to have to, it can't be a pineapple, because pineapples come after the physics. Same with minds. Minds are like pineapples. Making up this new category of stuff that hasn't been created. Like, I could say that there's a magical pineapple that hasn't been created yet, and assert it's this new class of thing that can go before physics, but it's just incoherent, because again, all pineapples we know of, none of them have that property of being uncreated. All minds we know of, none of them have that property of being uncreated. And so to say that there is this new class of mind that is uncreated with no evidence of this uncreated class even existing is implausible, for the exact same reason of claiming there's an uncreated pineapple before the universe. The better explanation here would be is there's something that we can learn about through physics that predates the physics, and asserting that it's a pineapple or a mind and that has this new property we have no evidence of doesn't seem to make sense, and is a bad explanation compared to like using physics.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think that I still think that the evidence we actually have is that everything we know had a beginning. So there can't be physics before physics, or if you want to say that, let's say, like the Earth is a part of a bigger context, in the same way our universe is a part of a bigger context, then sure, I mean, you're free to make arguments like that, but there are no evidence of that. And that's my point, that if we are just sticking with what we have actually found, that's that everything we know, including even time and space, had a beginning. So, and another thing I react to is that you say everything we know, but that's the dispute, right? So you're presuming what you're trying to prove. We are disputing if you say that God doesn't exist, but that's also part of the part of the knowledge we as humans have. So I don't, so even if you say that God doesn't exist, at least the experience of God exists, and which needs to be. No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. So what I'm trying to say is that God is also a part of the things we know and can be part of the explanation. And historically, that was the debate. It was between Did God do it? No, there is no need for that, because God does. The universe was, eternal, and then we scientists find out that the universe was not eternal, and the atheist in the beginning was, feeling not comfortable with that, and so I think that's a prediction as well as an argument. But I don't say it proves everything about the Christian faith. But you asked me for an argument,
Right.
and the last thing I want to say, maybe you can address it, is, don't you think we should make a distinction between, let's say, an argument and, let's say, it being false or true? I mean, you're saying like that's not a good argument, that may be the truth, but it's still an argument and some kind of evidence for God. I don't see, if you're denying that, I don't feel that genuine, how do you say, genuine.
Well, if an argument is false, it wouldn't be evidence. So the fact that there is an argument, I don't think I don't think you can say there is an argument, therefore it's evidence. I think you'd have to say here's an argument and it's true, therefore it's evidence.
But if it's true, it's why do you need the argument? I mean, the arguments are used to show us if something is true or false. So sure, there are arguments, there are scientific theories, let's say, that are true or false. But because I believe, let's say, it's false, I can't say it's not a scientific theory. It's still a scientific theory. It's just that I believe it's false. So I think we need to make that a distinction. Don't you think that?
No. So I can say like, cats are dogs and dogs are chickens, therefore cats are chickens. Is that evidence that cats are chickens? No, because it's false. The argument
You're a smart
false.
guy. I think you agree with me.
What? Well,
You're
so
a smart guy.
Well, right. So like, I can make an argument: cats are dogs, dogs are chickens, therefore cats are chickens. Does the fact that I've been able to construct an argument, indicates
that's an
evidence?
Argument.
What?
Yeah, that's an argument, let's say, but it's false because of this and this and this and this reasons, let's say. It's internal coherent, but the premises are false.
Right.
But sometimes I hear you say that it's not an argument, or in the beginning you say you couldn't even distinguish bad arguments from good arguments, and that poses a kind of question for me on how truthful you are in your, let's say, search. Because I can acknowledge that some arguments for atheism are better, at least, than others. Of course, it must be the case.
Right, but you acknowledge that me making the argument, cats are dogs, therefore dogs are chickens, therefore cats are chickens. Is that evidence that cats are chickens?
I would say evidence. No, I don't say it's we know it's false, so I can't say it's evidence, but
right. But so like, simply making an argument isn't evidence. Just making arguments isn't evidence. There has to be something more than just you made an argument.
Yeah. But do you feel that the argument, everything that begins has a cause, and let's say we give God as the explanation, do you feel it's in the same level as that? Do you think like people are so stupid?
Sort of. I'd say like, I think that would be more analogous to a blurg is a flugeblug. A blurg is a flugeblug. Like, is that evidence that a blurg is a flugeblug? Well, those don't mean anything. Like those words are irrelevant. And so the same thing, saying everything that begins to exist has a cause, is equally as incoherent, because it's not whether those words, what they correspond to in the fundamental nature of reality, into physics, is not well defined. So they're like, a blurg is a flugeblug. It's just not coherent. So saying a blurg is a flugeblug would not be evidence that it's true, because they don't necessarily mean anything. And the same thing would apply to all things that begin to exist have a cause, because we don't know that. In fact, the consensus in physics is that that's wrong, that things begin to exist without a cause all the time, that randomness itself is a fundamental force. Citation? Okay. The
source.
Fundamental attitudes towards physics poll on I forget what it was. I don't know if I have it saved anymore, but
It's
there's a
okay. You
poll on
can.
the fundamental attitudes towards physics, and they do one of the questions is what is randomness? Is randomness and there's 4 options. One of them was is randomness only apparent, and there is some other thing there causing it, and that was a very small percentage. And the majority percentage was, is randomness a fundamental force in physics? And that one got like 50%. And then the other one was randomness is some essence of something, and that one got also like 30%. So randomness is being like some fundamental essence of physics is the consensus view. Secondly, there's like brute contingencies, brute facts are possible in philosophy. So things can begin to exist without a cause. That's also possible. And so whether or not this argument is true is contingent on how the fundamental nature of reality works. And if the fundamental nature of reality doesn't correspond to our intuitions about beginning to exist in causes, then no, it wouldn't be evidence of anything. It would just be wrong, just like cats are dogs and dogs are chickens. And so simply the fact that we can form an argument is not evidence until we can actually demonstrate in reality in physics that this argument, the premises in this argument are true. And so simply the ability to form an argument would not be evidence of any kind.
Okay, but not all arguments are construed in that way of premises and conclusions. So what I meant is that it feels like, so you say, give me an argument. So person X gives you an argument, and because and say the person mentions God, you have a methodology, but say, but God doesn't exist, so that's not an argument. So and that leads you to the conclusion, no arguments for God are even better and worse, which explains
That
why.
would just be begging the question. I wouldn't consider that to be a refutation. I'd say that for an argument to be evidence, you have to be able to show that the premises correspond to reality. And so if one of your premises was God exists, then yeah, you'd have to demonstrate that in some way.
But you're not allowing God to be an explanation.
Sure I am. Like, that's the novel testable predictions thing. I'd say if I believe God exists and I pray to God and God gives me a gold brick and I get a gold brick, that is evidence of God. That would definitely be God doing the gold brick thing. So I'm not totally allowing God as a possibility.
Okay, so let's say that. Okay, sorry, I missed your example. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so if I believe God exists, when I pray to him, he will give me a gold brick. I pray to God, a gold brick appears, evidence of God.
Okay, so great. Let's work with that. So let's say that actually happened to you.
Yeah.
Would you consider that proof of God?
Evidence. It would be evidence.
Let's say evidence, sure. But do you also see that that wouldn't be evidence, let's say, for someone else in a strict sense? It would be only personal evidence for you. Okay.
Right. So then I have to test it to other people and say, okay, if God exists, you believe in God, you pray to him, and gold brick appears for you. And then if that happens, that would be more evidence.
Okay. So great. So you agree then? Do you agree with that a person can know something without, let's say, other persons knowing it? Logically, that's possible, right? I can know that my wife is sleeping in that room, let's say, but sure. There is no. It's something just that I know right now.
Sure. Okay. One person can know one thing that other people don't know. Like, I know what I'm imagining and no one else does. Sure.
Sure. Exactly. So my point in the beginning, I think you're making my argument, if you want to call it that, from the beginning, was that for Ludovicus, when he had that experience, he was saying, okay, if you exist, let this person read my mind. And the person says, look, I know what you're thinking. I don't want to read your mind, but let me say or do something else. Even if that's not an argument for you, because you don't know the guy. I mean, he could be a charlatan or something else. I understand that, of course. I don't believe everything people tell me, but I just, for him, that is evidence enough for him to be rational in his faith in God.
No. So that's the part I would disagree with. So if I saw a gold brick, if I prayed for a gold brick and a gold brick appeared to me, That would not make it rational for me to believe God exists. It would be evidence. But then for me to be rational God exists, I would have to test this evidence to make sure it's not just my imagination. Because it could just be I'm under a really powerful delusion. So I'd say, like, all right, so can I take this gold brick to a bank and trade it in for $1 million? Then use that $1 million to buy a Ferrari? Then like, now we're getting somewhere. So this wasn't just my imagination. I can do stuff with it. And can I do it again on national television? That would be great evidence. Can other people do it? That would be great evidence. You would need some other way other than your personal experience to verify this. It would count as evidence if you had a novel testable prediction, but to make it rational to believe that there was a God, you would need to be able to verify that in a controlled study for other people to be able to also notice, not just your own personal experience.
Okay. So if I understood you right, did you say now or admit that there are arguments for God's existence because evidence for people have had that kind of experience? And I mean, it's not only him. I can also tell you another story about me, but I don't want to bore your audience.
So if you can make novel testable predictions and they work for you, that would be evidence for you, but you would never be justified in believing God. You would have to then demonstrate it to objectively novel testable predictions for double-blind peer-reviewed studies. Then it would be real evidence. Then it's like, if you could do that and verify that your personal experience testable predictions work in an objective criterion, then I'd be like, yes, you're justified in believing because these things work. If it's just your personal experience, doesn't work. But if you can verify those personal experience testable predictions in an objective context, now you're justified in believing. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. I don't think God would allow himself to be a subject of let's say a test like that. So if a test like that were to be made, I would probably think that it can't show anything. But it's interesting that the argument you're making, that is a historical Christian argument. Saint John of Damascus is making exactly this argument against Islam. He's saying that, so-called Prophet Muhammad went to the mountain and said, I spoke with God, so now you need to do this. And he says, where is the prediction category? Is any scripture predicting this man to come? No. Has anyone witnessed this to collaborate with him that have the same kind of experience? Have they seen him do this? No. So but in contrast to the Christian faith, he gives arguments from the scriptures that people had this many had the same kind of experiences, both in group and individually. But in any case, I think that I don't think everyone like you and me are sitting now and having this philosophical religious discussion. For most people, they are not thinking about this kind of stuff. So if you're just a simple person and you have this profound encounter with another godly person that has the rumor of being that, and he's telling you things that he can't know, I think people are justified to believe in God. I don't agree that you have to do a super research or something like that. I mean, we don't do that with anything almost. Very little of the things we know to be true has gone through this kind of process.
Like pretty much the vast majority of things we know have gone through that process. So it's the same with history. Like,
really? I mean, how do you know that people that fall off the plane without a parachute are more likely to die? Has there been how do you say? Have you like two controlled groups where you're like pushing out half of the group outside without parachute?
We have planes that break up in the air, and that's a controlled test group that we have testable results from.
But many survive. There are stories that people survive. And this is actually a peer-reviewed study I'm referring to. I don't remember. It was years ago.
Yes, I'm familiar. I know the exact story where a woman fell from a plane and survived, and it was really cool. Sure. But we have the numbers on it. We can test like the number of people who've fallen from a plane, and we can just count number of survivors, number of non-survivors, and we can do a statistical analysis. Here's the probability you're going to survive if you fall out of a plane. It's very, very low. So we have
Sure.
controlled test groups on those. We have empirical data that
But this is not
demonstrates.
controlled group. This is not a controlled group.
Yeah, it
It
is.
can be other reasons. Maybe the plane, being inside a plane, give you some disadvantage.
What?
I can't speak. I'm so tired.
Well, we can never
maybe-
isolate all variables. Like that's impossible. But we do have empirical research on the number of people who have fallen from planes, and we can research that. And it's double-blind, peer-reviewed. It's not like we expected it to happen. So it's double-blind. It's a control group of people in planes who fall out of planes. It's not because like a non-controlled group would include people who didn't fall out of planes or something. So it's definitely a control group. We can see they're in the plane. We can see if they bought a
It's not a
ticket.
controlled group.
That is a controlled group. So a controlled group just
they're
means
not.
like you're contrasting a people who are affected by some variable versus people who are not affected by the same variable under the same conditions. That's what a control group is. If people in a plane who fall out of the plane, people in a plane who do not fall out of a plane, that's a control group. Like you have a specific set of people who are input under a certain stressor, and a certain set of people who are not put under that stressor to find out who survive and who die. Like, yeah, that's a control group. Like reality is a
think
control
that's
group.
statistics. I mean that statistically you can say that, but to be able to say it's a control group, there are some parameters that there are some supervising and stuff like that. So there was a paper written about this. This was many years ago. I don't remember, but they made the conclusion I made. But the point of the paper or the pre-research was to show that we know things, even if no one has survived let's say no one has fallen from a mountain or something, or an airplane. We should be justified, I think, to say that it's more likely that you will be safer with a parachute than with none. But in any case, I'm starting to get tired now. So I think, yeah, I don't know if you want. I'm agreeing with you, of course, but I don't. Strictly speaking, that's not a control group in a strict sense. I think maybe I'm wrong, but
well, a control group is a people who are not given the experiment. That's all. Like a control group, you have two groups. You have a control group and an experimental group. The experimental group is the people who undergo the experiment. The control group is people who don't undergo the experiment to test the effects of a placebo. So the control group in a plane would be the planes that didn't, people who didn't jump out of the plane. That would be the control group.
Sure. I don't want to stay with this argument. It was just an illustration, but okay.
Or the parachute. The parachute people would be the control group. People who were not thrown out of a plane without a parachute. That would be a control group. So like, yes, control groups can exist whether or not they're made deliberately by people. There's still like there's groups of people who are given the experiment and groups who are not.
Yeah, sure. Okay. It's not a hill I want to die on.
All right. Well, we have been going for about 2 hours. It was
Sure.
a great conversation. Appreciate you coming on. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find more about your work, like your YouTube channel?
Sure. I have a YouTube channel called According to John. It's mostly interviews now. I'm doing interviews in Swedish also. I have translated most of them, but so you can find me there. And if you know Swedish, I'm writing also in Swedish on Substack. It's called Enligt Ioannis, if you're interested in that. Otherwise, I thank you, Tom, for the engagement. We disagree, but still it was fun to talk with you.
Absolutely. Thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.